Welcome to the App or Not to App podcast with the App Man, Jeremy Callahan, where we talk about why apps are not a luxury item and are essential to your business success. I've been in the mobile industry for over 20 years, and the question I always get is to app or not to app. Definitely, you must app. Mobile apps can help your business reduce costs, increase leads, and reduce manpower. An app is not a luxury item, it's a necessity. So let's get started making you money. Hey, welcome to today's podcast. Special guest, Mike Hartington, and he is the lead developer advocate at Ionic, a product that I'm really super high on because I love basically hybrid mobile app technology. And these guys have really taken it to the next level with what they're doing. They got several products. They got Creator. They got Capacitor. Mike, welcome to the show today. How are you?
Doing really good. Thank you for having me on here. It's super fun.
Yeah. So what is your background? I looked at you, briefly. It looks like you did some design and some mobile app development. How do you become the developer advocate at Ionic?
A lot of just, hey, can I have a job? You guys are doing cool stuff. The actual story is years ago, I was in a different career. I was doing some development. I was the only person who knew how to open up an editor and write stuff. And this was in Flash.
Yeah.
So back in the old ActionScript days. Did a couple things for my previous employer. Then my boss got an iPad and was like, hey, how come none of this Flash stuff is loading on my iPad? So I decided to learn JavaScript, eventually found this hybrid app landscape, built some of my own little mini apps for the company, found Ionic, really loved what they were doing. This was 2013, 2014, the beginning. Pre 1.0 for Ionic, and then I asked them if they were hiring, joined the team afterwards, and eventually just came into the role of DevRel and sometimes actually writing code and most of the time giving talks. Yeah, so you're out and about. I guess the overall goal is what? Just notoriety on the product and getting people to get onto the platform? At the end of the day, yeah, but I think a lot of it also has to do with just educating people on, JavaScript development, a lot of mobile development practices. How can you build, something I talk about quite a bit is just progressive web apps. And if you're thinking about building progressive web apps, how can you do it in a way, across all these different frameworks and, build something that is going to be compelling, is going to follow best practices, and just educating people about it. And that's really something that I get a lot of, I'm really passionate about, is just educating more than just selling.
Yeah.
And if they happen to not use Ionic, that's cool because ideas and practices still relate back to what they're doing. And that for me is, super satisfying.
Yeah. I dig that education aspect to it because as a former front-end guy that became a mobile guy, it just seemed like the community is so focused on front-end frameworks and, all this different stuff. It's why isn't this community going after mobile in a major way? Because, we have the capacity to touch it, in all these hybrid frameworks. And it's that's why I really dig what you guys are doing, because you're actually saying, hey, take your front-end code, take your front-end developers, and make them mobile.
It kind of goes back to the idea. It's most of us at Ionic, the original team, we were all just developers day to day, and the tools that didn't exist really, that existed during our kind of heyday, during our before Ionic times, they just weren't up to par, and they didn't really give us what we wanted. So we built the tools, and now it's our job to go out and hey, we're somehow considered experts at this. Let's try to give back and educate people. It's here's why you don't want to do this, because it's going to be slow and it's going to cause a lot of layout issues. So it's kind of well, now that we've learned all this stuff, how can we give back and like teach people?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great. Cool. So give us a high level just of what Ionic is. I mean, I know there's a lot of parts to it. There's Creator, there's the native plugins, there's Capacitor. Just tell everybody about, how you explain it to people.
So the way I explain it is Ionic is a framework for building cross-platform apps using whatever front-end JavaScript framework you want to use. You bring that, we bring the UI components and the native interactions, and you write in that framework of choice using our components and our native layers. And then you ship an app to iOS, Android, Electron, or to the web as a progressive web app.
Yep. And then I know for, the way I think I originally found you guys was through the Creator tool. Cause I was like, I was doing, like I do a lot of bids and, like, I guess requests for proposal work for people that need, apps built. And all of a sudden I found this cool tool that I could like drag and drop and create a presentation. And when I went to a presentation, I actually had an app to, like a clickable click-through app to show people. And that kind of just spun into all the other stuff you guys are doing. So what is, give us a deeper dive into what Capacitor is, because I know that's kind of the new direction you guys are going now.
So yeah, Capacitor itself, I think like the best way to describe it is a spiritual successor to Cordova. Like we still follow a lot of the same philosophies of, the web is a good platform and we should be using it as much as we possibly can. But what we want to do is, be pretty aggressive about how we updated the platform, the native platform dependencies, interacted with the native projects, and just rethinking on how that API should look across all these different platforms. So at like a really like high level, it's a Capacitor API that you interact with when you want to say talk to the camera, Bluetooth, geolocation. And then as you go out, say, and build for iOS, you're going to get the native iOS calls to those specific features. Android's going to get their specific features, and the Electron will get their own specific features, and the same thing for the web. So you don't have to, if iOS, if Android, if this, it's the one abstraction that you code against, and it knows how to proxy itself to these different platform APIs.
Right. And so when you talk about these kind of the native plugins, whether it's geolocation or whatever, or a camera, those are pretty well built out. Are you guys leading anything as far as the native plugin development, or is that just kind of on its own?
I mean, we're doing a lot of work with, I think one of the most important ones that we did, we spent a significant amount of time working on was the file system API. Mm-hmm. Mostly because the API that some APIs that had existed beforehand were based on this now defunct web platform feature or a web platform like proposal. And just what was there didn't really stay up to date or match what we could do, say, if we're familiar with like a node-based approach, like how Node's file system API works. So we did a lot of work in kind of testing out to make sure that if we go about making a file API that follows this protocol and this kind of approach, is this something that developers are going to like? And if yes, how do we make this entire process, fairly approachable for most people and simplify a lot of the hoops that they would have had to gone with older implementations? So we spent a lot of time with that file system API, Bluetooth. There's a whole slew of plugins that we have on the Capacitor website that I'm blanking right now on. But we did like
we were just using that one the other day. We used your SpeechKit API. So
SpeechKit, yep.
Yeah.
There's like what we consider core functionality or core features that you shouldn't have to install a plugin for. You get those features kind of for free. And then there's a growing community around third-party services or third-party APIs that where you want to encourage and help grow and get that community contribution numbers up.
Yeah, that out of the box functionality or features is in-app purchases part of that?
That is a very good question. Like I said, the actual list of plugins that we have is slipping right now, but let's see. No, we do not have in-app purchases as part of the default, which I would agree is not really something that we should get involved, because there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through.
Yeah.
But I think at some point it does kind of bring up an interesting point of, this is why it's different from Cordova, where in Cordova, everything, if you want to access or interact with the native features, it had to be done through a plugin, because the native iOS projects and the native Android projects, those could be deleted and blown away, and you're just recreating those projects all together. So everything had to be set up to work in a plugin that you could just kind of automate like a script. So with the way Capacitor kind of changes that is, these native iOS platforms and native Android platforms, these aren't something that you blow away. These get committed to the repo. They're as much of a project type as your web code.
Yeah.
So if you want to go in and set up in-app purchases on, say, iOS, you're setting it up through Xcode, which is probably a better approach to handling it than random arbitrary scripts. The UI is just so much more easier to do that, and they are committed to history. So you have all that information, and you're not having to have a plugin to manage all that. So you're just setting up, here's my vendor identifier or vendor identifier key, and all the other entitlements that we can add to this project. Right.
So that kind of gets into leads into another area. It's like, so you have Ionic Capacitor, you do a build, and then when you do that, it actually opens up in Xcode, right? And so, then once you're in Xcode, you can go in and do a lot of like the native functionality within that before you go.
Yeah, it's so like a lot of the problems and like pain points that we would constantly hear is, I tried to build from the command line, and then I got this arbitrary exit code, and I'm not quite sure why. It's like, well, if you open up Xcode, you get a pretty clear, oh, you forgot to sign your app. It's like little things like that. It's like, okay, why are we spending so much time investing in these CLI tools when the native UIs and the native IDEs kind of solve this for us? It's like, we should just use these native IDEs because they're powerful. They have all the features and tools that we really would want. And they're helpful to us. Like, they get us to the point where we're not having to scratch our head and reinvent the wheel 3 different times for different platforms and different OSs. It's like Xcode will just say, hey, you forgot to sign your app, dummy.
Yeah.
Click and do the thing for you.
Import your certificate.
Right. It's like, versus me trying to like, all right, what does error code 65 actually mean? It's like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's the trials and tribulations for guys like you and I who've been doing this since 2011, where it was like, it was just like the Wild West as far as doing a build and trying to figure out, or just figuring out how to try to test something on a device. It was like,
oh yeah, I mean the fact that it's now so much easier to just deploy to like my iPhone or Android device, and just like it's a drop down select versus. All right, well, now I got to find the device UUID, make sure that's entered into my certificate, like developer portal. Like, it's a night and day difference for testing and deploying to an actual device.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about kind of at that command line, build process. It doesn't matter, right? If I'm using React, Angular, whatever JavaScript framework, are you guys working across everything now?
Yeah, for the most part. Angular is still like our big user base. and it's where I would argue that we have probably the more complete tool set and integration layers. React isn't that far behind. We got a beta out recently that has a lot of upgrades working with our CLI integration. So Ionic Start, My App, -- type React. And you can get like a full, like essentially a create React app project setup, but with Ionic already included and a couple of default setups for like routes, animations, all that kind of work done for you for what you've expected, what people expect from like an Ionic project type. And then Vue support is still beta, but it's coming a little bit more slowly. Figured that having 3 people split their time between different frameworks might not be the best use of energy.
Right.
So we kind of taken the approach where it's like, okay, now that Angular is at a good place and we have pretty much solid support all across the board, let's focus on React, get that done, and then focus on Vue. And once everything else is like stable and we're not having to split our energy.
So is Vue, is that growing at such a rate that it's going to be, mainstream pretty soon, or is it just going to be React and Angular, do you think?
That's a hard question to ask. I've made several predictions about development. I thought React was going to be dead by the time we hit 2017. But then Facebook decided they were going to change their licensing, so people were okay with it. I thought Preact was going to be much bigger or much more popular these days. And it's still kind of like, well, what's Preact? So right. I don't know which one's going to be the superhero or the famous one.
Well, I guess the question is like, how do you put all your resources towards something, or do you just stick with Angular? Because I mean, Angular's got the big community, right? And React, we know it's there. So,
I mean, it's an interesting, if we look at it in different ways. Like if there's something that we can spend a lot of our time on, we could work on it. And then we also try to invite and encourage like community collaboration. Like we've had a lot of collaboration with some engineers from a company called Modus Create. And they were, really helpful in getting Ionic Vue up and running and testing it out and building features. So if there's more of a need for something that we're not able to fully invest all of our time in, we encourage so much collaboration, are willing to spend the time to like help you get set up and we'll meet with you like on a weekly basis, basically to figure out, is this the right path that you should be going down?
Help us help you.
Yeah, more or less. Like it's
work together, right?
Beneficial for not only us but for the community. It's like, why would we turn down outside help or collaboration?
Agree. I was when I was doing in-app purchases and the subscription model, it's like impossible to tell who's subscribing and what the state of a subscription is through Apple. You got to basically build your own.
Yeah.
And there was this third party that was out there. I was like, hey, I'll help you guys build it. You guys have a good tool. It just doesn't work with my setup. So always good to collaborate. So what's next, man? What do you guys got coming out? What's going on with Ionic? Where are we going with all this?
So I guess for the foreseeable future, the next immediate plan is to get Ionic React out and at a stable release. It's where we've been spending a lot, at least the framework team has been spending a lot of our time and energy getting that out and ready and testing it, just building as many apps as we can to try to break it.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, we've been doing a lot in the developer experience kind of space. You mentioned Creator earlier, and we've been taking a lot of time to figure out how do we push Creator forward, and eventually realize we need to create a new product. The idea with Creator of being able to just drag and drop and have as much low code, as little as code as possible to generate an app, really goes so far, because once you export out, you can't really export it back in and expect everything to be understood. So we've been working on this product called Studio, which is again, spiritual successor to Creator, where it's a full-blown IDE and editor to, you know, write and code your project if you are more comfortable with HTML, CSS, and TypeScript. And then it also comes with a interface builder, drag and drop theme generator to for getting designers and more of the visually inclined people to take part in that development process and figure out, okay, well, here's our mock-up. Let's get the structure of it figured out first, and then we can start to wire up all the interactions and all the JavaScript. Yeah,
that's cool. I remember when I was at IBM last year, they had a product, I forget what it was called, but it was a low-code solution. It wasn't super good on the UI, but it was good with basically it was like you just put all these squares on a page and connect them, almost like a not a blueprint, what do we call it? Anyways, you know, with the triangles and the if this and else, and you know.
Yeah, I think it's like Scratch or something.
What was it?
I think it's called Scratch.
Possible. I forget. They had so many products, but you still had to know how to code, and it really, like when you actually exported and looked at the code, there were so many like files. It was just like, it was impossible to read. Or find where something was happening, you know.
Yeah, that's one of the things that like we looked at it and we're like, how can we make it so that way people can just create a project, and instead of having to like change a file structure to fit our format, can we just make the editor like understand what we're doing? So we've gone through like every project that you create, with Angular at this for the moment. It knows how to understand it because it knows how to understand Angular projects and knows how to understand, like, if I'm in an HTML file, render this stuff out. If I'm in a CSS file, here are the specific utilities that we can work with. And it doesn't really care how everything's structured out. It just knows on a file-by-file basis, which is a lot more powerful and easier to work with.
Yeah, I totally agree with that because, you know, it's like all this... all the kind of how things have changed over the years, you know, with all the different frameworks and JavaScript and, you know, version 6 and all these different things that have come out, like we're still just creating registration pages for the most part, and people are just buying stuff online. We're not, you know, outside of gaming, we're not really doing anything that we haven't been doing since the days of the web. So let's see, how can we make it easier?
Like 90% of the apps that are out there are basically CRUD apps.
Yeah.
We're just updating records in some database and deleting them. And we're not doing anything overly fancy. So it's like, just make that part simple, and then everything else eventually will fall into line.
Yeah, that's great. That's why I was like, how can we just get something to low code or no programming at all? Let's program ourselves out of a job, Mike.
Eventually, just AI will come in and destroy everything, and we'll be out of the jobs living in the forest.
There you go. Well, at least I know how to fish, so I'm ahead of 90% of the environment here. So
that's important to note: how to fish, how to sow, and how to farm.
That's right. Cool, man. So I'm going to wrap it up. Give us a plug. How can we find out more? Get in touch with you if we need to.
Yeah, I'm basically M. Hartington on the internet everywhere. It's the real original first initial last name. I post a lot on Twitter, GitHub, on the Ionic forum. If you want to figure out find out what we're doing with Ionic Framework on Twitter, we're pretty vocal about what we do and post a lot of updates to keep everyone in the know, more or less.
Right on. Yeah, and right before we popped on here this morning, I got an email from you. I got your weekly email. I saw it coming out. Oh, geez, I wonder if he's busy and he's gonna cancel. No, it's just a weekly email.
No, just an email. Just making sure everyone knows what the community is doing.
Nice. All right, Mike. Well, hey, thanks for being on the show today. Appreciate having you on and getting to know you, and love what you guys are doing for the community, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Cool.